Hi, I'm Dongsheng. Welcome to Digging to China, where we explore China in depth to reveal unique perspectives. Today, let's talk about something a little lighter. It's the weekend, so let's keep things relaxed. Back on February 25th, Trump announced a new golden visa program designed to attract global millionaires and top talent. The program costs $5 million, and in return, buyers get a gold card, which grants permanent residency similar to a green card and a path to U.S. citizenship. Trump said this plan would replace the current EB-5 investor visa program and take effect in March. He even claimed it would generate massive revenue for the US and help pay off the national debt. Most golden visas around the world don't lead to citizenship. Countries like Portugal, Spain, and Greece have similar programs, but the path to citizenship is complicated. Trump's $5 million gold card does include a citizenship option, but the details remain unclear. There is also no cap on the number of applicants. Whether a million or 10 million people apply, the program stays open. If a million people applied, that would bring in $5 trillion. Trump even suggests that if 10 million applied, it would generate $50 trillion, enough to wipe out the $30 trillion national debt and still leave $20 trillion for a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. If Trump were a businessman pitching this plan to investors, he'd be laughed at. Why? Because a solid business plan has three key parts. First, it identifies the problem. What issue needs solving? This requires market analysis. How big is the market? What's the growth potential? What needs aren't being met? And what obstacles exist? Second, it explains how the solution works. And third, it highlights why only this specific team can succeed. What expertise or advantages do they have? Of these, market analysis is the most critical. How many people can actually afford a $5 million visa? It's hard to determine because of financial privacy. But based on public wealth reports, about 4 million individuals and households worldwide have over $5 million in total assets, not cash, just total assets. Trump's assumption that 1 to 10 million people would buy this visa completely ignores market realities. A proper market analysis considers current numbers, future trends, comparisons, market share, and conversion rates. Let's break it down. Of the 4 million high net worth households worldwide, about 40% are already in North America, 25 to 30% are in Europe, 10% in the Middle East, and another 10% in Asia, including Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. China's numbers are harder to pin down. Would all these wealthy individuals want to move to the US? Even if they did, the total pool of wealthy people wouldn't increase. The market would shrink. Now let's compare this to other countries. Portugal's golden visa requires just 500,000 euros. How many people apply for that annually? Trump hasn't done this kind of comparison. Market share is crucial. Other countries, including Canada and the European nations, are competing for the same wealthy immigrants. If Portugal charges 500,000 euros while the US demands $5 million, a tenfold difference, how competitive can the US really be? U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick claimed 250,000 people would apply for the U.S. golden visa. But where does this number come from? For context, the EB-5 investor visa requires an investment of $500,000 to $1.5 million in a business that creates at least 10 jobs. The program has an annual cap of 10,000 slots with an approval rate of just 16%. That means out of 100 applicants, only 16 get approved. Right now, around 9,000 to 10,000 Chinese investors are in line for the EB-5 visa. So how did they come up with 250,000 applicants for Trump's golden visa? If the estimate of 4 million households with $5 million in assets is accurate, the real target market for this program is probably around 400 to 500,000 individuals. Since there's a competition, let's assume the US captures 60% of the market. That's 200 to 300,000 potential applicants. But not everyone in that group will actually apply. A reasonable conversion rate might be 20,000 applicants. Would people actually put up $5 million for this visa? Some might take a $5 million loan using $10 million in assets as collateral. Before China's real estate crash, many Chinese investors would have done exactly that. If Trump had launched this program during his first term, a significant number of Chinese investors might have participated. But today, many banks that once issued such loans are stuck with bad debt. Another key issue: the $5 million must come from legal income. If an applicant can't prove where the money came from, the US would take the funds and deny the visa, no refunds. For Chinese citizens, legally earning $5 million is extremely difficult. As the saying goes, no one gets rich without the windfalls, and no horse gets fat without the night grazing. If you are just a salaried worker following the rules, making $5 million is nearly impossible. And after spending $5 million on a visa, how would you sustain your lifestyle in the US? That's another major concern. Could big US companies buy golden visas for talent? Apple or Google could, in theory, purchase them for top employees instead of relying on the H-1B visa lottery. But would they? Not likely. $5 million is enough to open a new office in Canada and hire multiple employees, making this an inefficient solution. And if a company sponsors an employee's golden visa and they later resign, what then? Would the startup founders buy these visas? Companies like Shenyang, DD, Luckin Coffee, and ByteDance could be interested. They have high valuations, they aren't publicly listed, they undergo regular audits without issue, and many founders or early employees hold stock options worth over $5 million. Some might convert that equity into a gold card, especially if tax incentives are involved. So, who are the real target customers of this $5 million golden visa? It seems aimed at wealthy individuals from China, Russia, and the Middle East. A few thousand people might be interested, but again, in China, most individuals with over $5 million in assets didn't earn it in ways that would pass US scrutiny. If a Chinese individual were to buy a golden visa for $5 million and immigrate to the US, and if the Chinese government later targeted them in the anti-corruption crackdown, issuing a red notice through the Interpol, the US would happily keep the money and send the person back. So these corrupt officials from China might not actually dare to come. So who else might be able to buy a golden visa and immigrate? People in the crypto industry could be potential candidates. They have income, and for some inexplicable reasons, they often have a lot of money. However, the legitimacy of their funds is often in a gray area. For example, Singapore previously used the golden visa to attract a large number of such individuals, but once they arrived, the government started cracking down on money laundering, scrutinizing the origins of their wealth, leaving them in an awkward situation. Right now, the situation is that everyone is talking about it, right? Could the amount be adjusted? Will it be $5 million, $4 million, $3 million, or $8 million? There's no final confirmation yet, and it's highly unlikely that the US will simply ask for a direct payment. Most golden visa and investment visa programs don't work that way. Instead, applicants usually invest in government-designated funds. In Europe, golden visa typically offer three options. 1. Investing in a local business. This requires a relatively large sum. 2. Buying into a government-designated fund. This costs slightly less. And 3. In some countries, purchasing property is allowed. You could buy a house for a few €100,000, but this would only grant you a visa, not citizenship, which is much harder to obtain. I expect that the US will likely adopt a similar approach, requiring deposits, investments in commercial projects, or contribution to national funds. Malaysia's Malaysia My Second Home program, for example, requires a deposit of 500,000 or 1 million Malaysia ringgit. Malaysia is actually quite strict about this. If you deposit a smaller amount, the validity period is very short and you must undergo regular reviews. But if you deposit a large amount like 5 million ringgit, you get permanent residency without any further scrutiny. And usually these government funds offer interest and returns. In other words, when you deposit your money, they pay you interest. Take Portugal, for example. Its Golden Visa program requires an investment of 500,000 euros in a government fund with a 6-year lock-in period. During those 6 years, you cannot withdraw the money, but you can earn an annual return of 7% to 15%. After the lock-in period, you can withdraw your funds while still keeping your residency status. Moreover, these government funds can be used as collateral. If I invest 500,000 euros in Portugal's government fund, I can still use that as collateral for a bank loan. And if something happens to me, my son can inherit it. I believe the US will most likely take a similar approach. It wouldn't just pocket the money. The funds will likely go into a sovereign wealth fund with a lock-in period, during which it will generate returns. The US government can then use the sovereign wealth fund for operations, using the profits to offset national debt, rather than simply taking $5 million per applicant and hoping to fill the debt hole that way. That's unlikely to happen. Another factor in the US is that individual states will likely have their own specific regulations. The federal government can't just collect $5 million and claim the applicant as its own responsibility. That wouldn't work. The person will still have to be settled in a particular state, and each state may have its own arrangements for this. As for China, first of all, China does not have an exit tax for high net worth individuals. This is quite rare. The US, for instance, imposed an exit tax on those who renounce their citizenship. If you immigrate and transfer assets, you may have to pay capital gains tax or other fees. But in China, there is no exit tax. After all, the rules are set by those who benefit from them. When Chinese citizens immigrate, they can transfer all their assets through banks or other means without being taxed. This is a unique aspect of China. Will China introduce an exit tax in the future? That remains to be seen. But in the future, China may also need to attract immigrants. What many people don't realize is that China actually has its own version of a golden visa. Since China's population is declining rapidly, it also needs to bring in immigrants. In China, an investment of $500,000 and 3 years of tax payments can grant permanent residency. China does have a permanent residence permit, which allows holders to stay indefinitely as long as they don't commit crimes or face deportation. However, it doesn't grant citizenship, but that doesn't really matter since Chinese citizens don't come up with voting rights anyway. The only condition is that you must reside in China for a few months each year. If you don't return for 1 or 2 years, your permanent residency status will be revoked. How many foreigners have applied for permanent residency in China? The Chinese government has never released an official figure. However, according to publicly available data, as of 2017, the number of foreigners holding Chinese permanent residence exceeded 10,000 for the first time. That's enough talk for today. Time to kick back and enjoy the weekend. The golden visa debate is fun to ponder, but let's be real, it's more of a cocktail party topic than a serious dilemma. Whether it's corrupt officials, crypto millionaires, or just rich folks hedging their bets, there's always a twist. Anyway, something to chat about over coffee. Cheers to the weekend. If you found this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.